Just do a test recording. Test for the podcast. Test, and you?
This is Greg, testing for the podcast.
Okay. Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 252 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on September 21st, 2022. This is the official podcast for the fan site avatarthelastairbender.online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, on today's show, we have a bit of news to cover. Some of it's actually pretty decent. And then we will also be getting back into our Avatar and Korra re-reviews. So we're going to be doing 3 episodes. So we're going to be doing from Avatar, the Fortuneteller, and Bato of the Water Tribe. So episode 14 and 15. And then from Korra, we're going to be doing K110, Turning the Tides. So, we'll jump into the news. So the first piece of news is that because of early reviews that have come out for Legend of Korra Patterns in Time, including one from myself, we do now know what all of the stories in Patterns in Time are. So I don't want to go too sort of spoilery here, because I do have a review up, and there's obviously spoiler discussion to be had when the book actually comes out. But basically, there are 5 new stories in the book. One we already knew about, and that was Cat Owl's Cradle. That's the Bumi and Milo story. That's going to be with art by the artist that's going to be doing the new Korra comic trilogy. There is Skyscrapers, which is a young Asami and Yasuko, her mother, story. There is Wisdom, a quick 2-page story that's actually about Guru Lahima. There is A Change in the Wind, which is a story about Korra, Asami, and Jinora. That's very character focused. And then there's Weaver's Ball, which is a flashback story about Korra during her Avatar training, and kind of like an incident that kind of happens during that, right as she's starting her firebending training. So they are the new stories. So it's an interesting selection. For some people, there will be obviously a lot of positives. Other people, there'll be negatives just because of the focus of these stories, what characters are included, what characters aren't included, and page count for each and every one of these stories. But Greg, what is your thoughts now that we know kind of the full kind of rundown of what's in this book?
I think from what I'm hearing, I like the ideas of the stories that they're going for and what they're trying to focus on. I think for it being, as long as it's taken to get here, I think a lot of people, regardless of if the stories are good or bad, are just going to be a bit sort of let down just on the amount of, the new ones that we're getting versus ones that we've had from before. So, in that part, it's a little bit of a letdown, but I'm glad that, people are getting them, they're reviewing them, and, that's going to finally get into people's hands.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I definitely noticed with this book, because it's felt like, in a way, I've revealed like all of the information about this book, like from the start to finish, just because Dark Horse have not done a good job about making public kind of anything about this book. Because if you just look on like your average book listing for this website, that doesn't even have preview pages up yet, it doesn't tell you what any story in the book is at all. And it's only because on like Edelweiss, there are preview pages that we even know the Free Comic Book Day books are in there. Now, if you're familiar with Team Avatar Tales, you probably know that anyway. But your typical fan probably doesn't even know that and is unfamiliar with that idea. So yeah. For a lot of people, it was a kind of big reveal that, 3 of the books I've already read. And then, of course, 5 that they're not telling us about. And so a lot of people were happy to hear what's actually in the book, but obviously disappointed at what is and is not in it. The main notable thing here is that Mako ends up not being in any single story in this book and he's also not in Beach Wars, so he doesn't appear in any short story content. Bo Lin also isn't in Patterns in Time at all, but at least he's in Beach Wars, which did come out this year. So that's a major thing. Like, two of your main cast just not in the book, even though the back of the book says they're in here somewhere. So that's definitely a bit of a criticism there. And then there are a few things like, we technically have two Milo-focused stories. We have two flashback stories of Korra during her training. And then the Guru Lahima story, it's only 2 pages, but it's obviously not specifically Korra era as such. So there is some weird stuff going on here. It definitely feels like now that we're getting it, this was never, I think, in any way planned to be like an anniversary celebration type thing. Otherwise, I think we probably would have seen more stories and definitely made sure to fit every character in. Still, in general, I like the book. It's much better than Team Avatar Tales, like much better, but it's not perfect still. But I think people will be, particularly impressed with, A Change in the Wind. That's the Asami, Korra, and Jinora story. That's my favorite. Cadell's Cradle is very good, and Skyscrapers is good, but it's very, very short as well. So, we'll review it when it comes out, but it's nice that we do actually have some information on that book. Next, we move on to New York Comic Con has sort of snuck up on us. It's happening October 6th to the 9th, and we do have the full schedule out, which means we know everything Avatar at the convention. So if you search Avatar on the schedule, you get 3 panels that come up. 2 of them are specifically Avatar in full, and then one of them is just going to feature Avatar. So the one that features Avatar is just going to be the McFarlane Toys panel, where Avatar just gets a mention as one of the things that they have. I don't know if for sure that means we'll get news about it, or if it's just sort of like a stock description that happens to include Avatar. But it would be nice to get some McFarlane announcements at the panel, because the last wave of stuff was pretty boring. They didn't have much new figures or characters in it, so it would be nice to see their, say, larger scale Korra figure, what characters they're going to move on to at the smaller scale, and so on. So, it's nice to kind of see that after what's been especially the last couple of months that haven't had too much merchandise news. But just on this one, what do you think they'll do with regards to McFarlane and having Avatar stuff? Now that I'm thinking about it, this is probably Blue People Avatar, and I'm pretty sure it probably is for sure Blue People Avatar. But do you think there'll be Avatar stuff at the McFarlane panel?
Yeah, that's a really good point there, because that is this would be the time to announce the Blue People Avatar stuff. I mean, I would hope it was, more ATLA, Korra type stuff, and they would get both of those sides of the coin out with more items. But I don't know, for some reason, it feels like the merch front for a lot of the figures stuff has kind of died down or slowed down just overall. So that kind of lowers my expectations a bit, I think, for some reason.
Yeah, so now that I'm thinking about that, I think that is James Cameron's Avatar. Though, as far as I'm aware, I think they did recently reveal a wave of that, so I'm not sure what new they necessarily have to cover with that, whereas Avatar is actually, I think, in a decent position if they have anything. So we'll see. It does just say brands like these ones, so there's still the opportunity for that. They still have Korra stuff to do eventually. We'll see what happens. But getting into the proper Avatar stuff, I suppose the first one up is the Thursday panel. This is going to be Avatar Braving the Elements podcast panel. Thursday, October 6th, 12 to 1. A live podcast appearance by popular Nickelodeon podcast that is the official voice of the Avatar verse. Right now, it only says Dante Vasco, but I think Janet Varney tweeted out something about this as if she's going to be there. So we'll see what happens. There is some excitement heading into this one because surprisingly at SDCC, we did get some Avatar news. So that set the sort of stage for, well, if you told us stuff there when we weren't expecting it, surely we'll get stuff now that we are expecting it. But it depends on like what way you interpret that news. Was that just to address some of the rumors and just clarify, hey, it's not going to be a Kyoshi movie first. We're doing Avatar first. Will they actually have anything to say? I don't really know, because this year especially has been very much every time we expect news, we don't get it. Every time we don't expect news, we get it. I don't know what way to think. But where are you at with the main panel here, I suppose?
I think I'm trying to go on the side of hoping nothing will be there, and then they'll actually say something. But overall, I mean, for these sort of podcasts, it's more about sort of like just being there and what they're talking about and stuff like that. So unless depending on who they're sort of like, if they even have an extra guest at this one, I would based on that, if I were to like expect anything new or something like that, because usually that's how these type of panels actually go.
Yeah, we're in an interesting spot because the news that they said at SDCC, it was nice to get an official update, but it was so minimal. Like they literally just said the movie's going to be about Aang and friends. Like, you couldn't get an any more vague announcement than that. That we still have no visual to go with it, no title, no official details basically at all. And then, if you consider the idea that this is the most obvious, they're doing the most obvious thing. In that sense, it's not much news, like, at all. So I'd like us to get a title. I'd like us to get a visual just to show that the Brave and the Elves podcast is super official and is going to get news. I'd like just that trend to continue, even if it is just something small. Otherwise, yeah, I don't expect the actual panel to be anything particularly interesting or eventful, but we'll see what happens. The other panel is Water, Earth, Fire, Air, continuing the Avatar Legacy. So the Avatar Legacy panel. Friday, October 7th, 10:30 to 11:30. Abrams Books, Dark Horse Comics, and Magpie, and then the rest of it is basically the typical description. Publishing creators, past and present and future of the beloved world. They don't have a guest list here, but I guess this is going to be a pretty similar lineup to SDCC as well. Which was interesting because as far as I'm aware, Magpie Games didn't say anything at that panel. Abrams Books, for the most part, didn't really have anything to say either. And it was Dark Horse who actually delivered the news there, where we got Azula in the Spirit Temple, cover reveal, and they said there was going to be a core comic trilogy. So, like what, give or take 3 months on, will there be an update on any of this stuff? There's definitely the option with all three publishers for something to happen, but again, given that they have recent stuff going on, I don't really know. What do you think is going to happen at the publishing panel?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like we're sort of up to date on a lot of the stuff where we know that it's already in progress. So I don't know how much more they're going to be put out in terms of like new news. I'm sure they'll bring, people who are there up to date with like the current things that are going and what they've mentioned at the other panel. But in terms of like new stuff, like is 3 months or so enough to like have like, something to show, or something that they're willing to show rather? Because I'm sure they have, tons of work already done, but are they at the point where they're really willing to like show or tease or anything like that? I would think that it's still too soon for a lot of that. But I do hope that they definitely show, just the stuff that they currently have and, some of the stuff, or at least speak to some of the stuff that they know is coming down the line.
Mm-hmm. So let's just quickly go through this. So Abrams Books, Dawn of Yang Chen, released quite a while ago at this point. They never do spoiler discussions, so I doubt, other than maybe allowing some more kind of detailed questions about Dawn of Yang Chen, I don't think Abrams Books are going to really discuss the Dawn of Yang Chen all that much, other than, hey, our book exists and is out. Beyond that, the only Avatar thing that Abrams Books have is the calendar, which is coming out in, I think it's October at this point now. But that is not super interesting because it relatively recently got revealed to be mostly like a redo of the previous one and not actually have that much new stuff in it. So I can't see them talking about that much. If they have news, it and if the schedule for the Yang Chen books is the same as the Kyoshi books, we should be in or around the time where they theoretically should be able to say something about the next Yang Chen book, whether that be the title, show off the cover, and just tell us anything about the progress of that, because it still is just a kind of one interview that actually confirms there is a second Yang Chen book. Sure, it ends in a way where it seems relatively clear, like it will continue, but it would be nice to get something a bit more sort of concrete about that. So where do you think Abrams' books are? Do you think there's any chance for Yang Chen Book 2 information?
I mean, I would hope that they would have something for that at this point, just because I feel like I mean, besides the fact that that's like their main, thing, of course, that feels like that's something that people would be interested in. And, that could actually be one of the highlights from this panel, I think, especially since it's so focused on publishing and everything like that. Like that and Dark Horse, probably have the main things that people would want to talk about, or you could generate some hype for. So I would hope they would go with that route.
Mm-hmm. Magpie, I think, are just in a weird spot because they do have things to announce, but it would look terrible for them to announce basically a Kickstarter for 2 new books when they've yet to fully complete the previous one, which we'll get to just after this with the September update. But because they're still in the process of that, I can't really see them talking much at all about, say, the Republic City book that's coming, the Spirit World book that's coming. I'd like to see it get mentioned, but that just means they're in a position like, well, what do they have to talk about? Like, maybe they can show a clip of the live play thing they have with the voice actors, tell us something about that, but that's also very specific because it's become really clear that the people who have the book already through the Kickstarter campaign is a relatively small section of the fan base, even though it was heavily backed. So other than them, I think, just mentioning that, hey, it will be going up for like mass market, like pre-order, I can't really see what Magpie actually have to talk about here. Maybe they'll have some of the physical stuff there at the panel to show off, but I'm not really sure about it. So they're in a weird spot. But what do you think Magpie will have to say, if anything?
Yeah, no, I would think that they would have, the physical, products that they, putting through their Kickstarter, because I believe at other conventions and panels that they've been to, they have showed them off and they have done some play testing and play games and stuff like that. So I don't know, I haven't looked around to see if they're doing anything else like they had it coordinated before. But I would suspect that they have that. But yeah, in terms of like any of their sort of announcements, that, I don't know, that seems like a odd one to be sort of announcing things like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. And then Dark Horse. Again, they actually had stuff to say, but we're getting to the point now where we're kind of waiting for that description, and I suppose basically like pre-orders effectively to open for Azula in the Spirit Temple. We still haven't got that yet, so it feels like that might coincide with the panel, something like that. Will be nice to see. Everyone, of course, is waiting to see any details on what the Korra comic trilogy is actually going to be about. So I'd really like to see like a cover, a title, just an idea about what that actually is about. Because again, like if they could talk about Azula and Spirit Temple like 3 months ago and say that it's scheduled for release summer 2023. The first part of this, which is also scheduled to be out in 2023, feels like we're getting to the point where like they should be able to just about early tell us something about it. That would be nice. But otherwise, like, sure, they have patterns in time to kind of talk about, but they haven't really been marketing the book all that much. They have the 2 omnibuses that are coming out, but again, they don't tend to market them that heavily, which leaves Beast of the Four Nations as being like the one kind of thing that I think has to get talked about at some point, because I think it's already crazy what the situation is with that book, where we've known about it for like a year and a quarter, a year and a half going on, and they've not acknowledged it yet. And especially because all the other deluxe sets are out, a lot of people are getting frustrated that they don't really know what the status is of this last part of this really expensive collection. So there's that pressure that I think they have to eventually release that book, and when is it actually happening? Because people are excited for it, but there's been no information since that original reveal. So what do you think Dark Horse are going to do? They actually have quite a bit of stuff, but you never know what way they're going to talk about things.
Yeah, I mean, the way that they're marketing some of their stuff definitely leaves you up for a lot of questions. Like, I mean, the Beast of the Four Nations, I mean, just as well, I was definitely more intrigued about that than any of the other ones, since the other ones we already have. This is just different versions of them. But with that one seemingly almost to be in like ghost of like being mentioned, I mean, I would really hope they would put some stock into announcing stuff on that one. Hopefully they've been working on it, but I'm not really there's like not a lot of info on that so far, so I'm really curious about what they're gonna say, or if they're even gonna mention it. It seems like they rather just like not mention that at all, so I don't know. I guess I kind of wouldn't be surprised if they don't mention that. But in terms of the other stuff that they have coming out, I mean, I guess if they're far along the line with it, they can do some pre-orders and stuff like that. But I don't know. It feels like a lot of their information they might give out might be sort of a retread of what we've heard before, because they're like at the point where they could do stuff, but they're still fine tuning things before they really go forward with like promoting everything.
Mm-hmm. The only thing is, like, in previous years, I suppose it actually hasn't happened. I think the last 2-ish years, but before that, they would usually have some sort of a like comic book resources news article come out like at the time of New York Comic Con that would usually have some sort of an announcement. I think that's possible, because usually those end up being sort of that sort of press release style news post where it is basically just the product listing in like news post form. And we're obviously waiting for that with the Azula comic. There's maybe the potential that like the usual schedule for the comics is that they release like 4 months after the previous one. They could say what the next Avatar comic is, if it's planned to be more from that creative team, if it's another like one-shot trilogy, but we have no idea what character it could be or anything like that. So that is New York Comic Con coming up in like 2.5 weeks. It's not too far away at all, and for the most part, it is the last chance for like big news for Avatar, I think, in the year. I don't really have too much confidence for Avatar like studios news, but I'd like to think they do something just to in a way show that, hey, come back next year and the conventions are going to be much bigger. This was the kind of teaser year. Next year will be the big year, because but they have to set the precedent for that after years and years of not a lot happening. So that would be nice to see. But yeah, we'll see what happens at New York Comic Con. So next, Avatar Legends September Kickstarter update. So this one's called Shipping Updates and Backer Kit Closing. So finally, they have an estimate on shipping for us. It's only taken them like 4 months to get around to this point, but here we are. So they say that the schedule means shipping to backers will begin in November and December. You should be getting your rewards just before the winter holidays this year. Because shipping begins in November, they'll be closing the backer kit on September 30th, meaning you have to lock in your shipping address by September 30th. So that's that. They do also say that because they're finally getting things going here, pre-orders for the public release PDF and physical books will go live on October 12th. So that's just the day the pre-orders will go live. They're not actually saying when the release of the public stuff will be. And then there's just a quick update on the actual play video is in approvals and will be out in November or December. And the digital tools, they'll have an update next month. So, okay, not the full update that we maybe wanted, but finally some actual progress. I think this is probably about what we predicted, that they'd get it just about before the end of the year, and that seems to be the way it goes. So what are your thoughts on this update?
Yeah, no, I think that is pretty close to what we're saying, or maybe even we thought maybe it might go till next year, but I'm glad that they're getting it out this year. And with everything that they've had to go through, it seems like people are now, happy to actually get the physical ones, and it seems like quite a people are sort of interested in getting the digital tools as well, with how everyone, plays games and stuff these days. So no, I think it's good that it's finally being pushed through and people will get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing here is like obviously being in Ireland, like I'm assuming that there's probably very little chance I'll actually get my stuff this year, and it probably will be more next year, knowing that it has to come from China to them. Then I think they explained that their process is that they probably have to ship it from America to wherever their kind of distribution warehouse is in Europe, and then from there it'll finally get to me. So it'll be pretty late for me. I think people in America probably have the best chance to get it this year, and we'll see what happens. I'm guessing next month we'll have the update that addresses like that whole regions and what way it's actually going to work, and we'll see what exactly happens. Similarly, I'm guessing they'll have like pictures of all the stuff as well, so that should be pretty good. But yeah, I suppose, what do you think they're going to do about like the release date for the public PDF? Like, do you think they're just going to like give it to people on October 12th with the PDF, or what?
I mean, I guess for the digital one, they really could if they really wanted to, right? But I don't know, I feel like they might, because, of everything that they're going through with their process, everything, I feel like they might wait until more people actually get theirs before they actually release it out into the wild, just so that more, people who backed it might have gotten it, a bit earlier. But yeah, I guess in theory, they could release it right then, right? Especially for the PDF.
Yeah, I suppose what they don't want here is that they don't want it to actually be a situation where where a Kickstarter backer will get their stuff quicker just by like ordering it through the public way than through the Kickstarter, because that would make the whole Kickstarter process just look kind of bad, that it's actually the slower way to get the stuff. So I'm assuming they're going to make it so that like it's probably like a December release or something like that. So there is that. And then the last couple of ones, kind of quick but interesting. So Avatar News, a week or two ago, started this thing where he was going to basically describe pictures of sets from the Netflix Avatar show that he had seen. So not post pictures, just describe set photos that he has seen. And he posted one about like a Karuk related location, and then just ahead of the second one he was about to release, Netflix contacted him and told him to basically take it down and not do it anymore, because apparently they want the viewing experience to be magical down to the last detail. Now, I don't know if that's any sort of direct quote from what they asked or just what he's assuming, but either way, this is really interesting because nearly every piece of information we know about this show has effectively been leaked information. They've only revealed like officially like 6-7 cast members. Everyone else, like the entire rest of the cast, has basically been leaked in this way. That hasn't been asked to be taken down, but a description of a photo has been asked to be taken down. That just comes across as like very, very weird to me, and makes it feel like they are maybe not as confident about things. That's at least the way I'd interpret it, but who knows what exactly the reasoning behind all of this actually is. What did you take from Netflix asking him to take this stuff down?
Yeah, that it feels real odd that they're doing that. I don't know. I mean, considering that, like you said, this is like the main place that we're getting like all the information from. I mean, I could understand if they wanted to sort of, control the flow of information themselves and they wanted to like, put it out on their own terms. But, they're going the other way and they're just trying to keep it all sort of like closed off, which, is fine. I mean, it's the sets, that really can only go, I guess, sort of like so far in terms of actually like understanding things. I mean, it's a nice thing to have, but just seeing the sets or even just the actors in costumes, sometimes that doesn't really it's not necessarily the best look because you can't see in the full context. So like I can understand why they would want to do it, but it just seems kind of odd. And I don't know, it feels like that they're almost that Avatar News has been almost pseudo like working with them already, that they probably could have like figured out how to get in touch with them even before this, so we wouldn't even have known that they didn't want to see it this way. So I don't know, it feels really weird. I definitely can see both sides of it, sort of showing that maybe they don't have the best confidence, or they just want it to be, as they say, as magical as it can be. But I don't know. It feels kind of odd, but I don't know. I think they should just do more, of their own sort of promotion on it and just control it themselves rather than sort of relying on Avatar News, exclusively almost to do it.
Like, I understand that they're probably afraid that the first look we get of this show is not ideal and people are immediately turned off it. That they don't want to have the Last Airbender movie happen to them. So they want whatever the first look is to be perfect, which would make sense if there was any sense for when they were actually going to release official information, because then all of a sudden, this was just yesterday, Avatar News posted, there will be no ATLA series news at Netflix's Tudum Global Fan Event this weekend. So I think this is actually something that for quite a few months we'd been kind of building up to as like, well, surely they have to show it here if they haven't shown it anywhere else. So it kind of feels like, okay, if he now knows specifically they're not at this thing. I haven't heard anything about, like, is there any potential for it at New York Comic Con? I don't even know if Netflix does all that much stuff in relation to that. But there seems like there's a bit of a kind of like conflict here of like, you're taking down news all of a sudden when you haven't been, and you're also not using any of the options to give out official information, like, at all. So the reaction to this has been somewhat like negative. Like, people are just like, are they ever going to talk about this? Because we're expecting this like mid to late next year, I think, give or take. So they have to talk about it soon officially, otherwise people might forget. So what do you think of this? That now that they're not going to attend this event, say anything about it? When will we hear about the show?
Netflix is, when they do their sort of shows, they're kind of odd when they sort of push them out, and, the way that they usually put them out, where they just dump everything at one time, also just sort of goes, I guess, against the grain in terms of, how we're used to getting things out, which sometimes seems to work pretty well for them. This is a whole different way of releasing things. But in terms of like generating hype and news and stuff like that, keeping the silent way doesn't really seem to go that well. But again, they've released other, adaptations of things where they have, released news and set photos and stuff like that. And I don't know, I think, despite the end result of some of those, not being positive, I think, leading up to it, a lot of people were, for getting all that information and news and sets and stuff, even if it wasn't like a perfect representation of the end result. So I don't know, I think there's some way that they could, definitely keep talking about things while, still holding back, the full scale release of things.
Because obviously the risk here is that they wait and wait and wait, and all the time that we're waiting, people are getting more and more like saying stuff like, do they not trust their product? What are they waiting for? And then if they finally do reveal something and it isn't like perfect, you're building up the problem. Whereas if you actually just got out ahead and showed us a little bit now when people are kind of eager to see something and it's not super negative, it's just like the communication with the fan base, which they kind of really haven't had so far. Same with Avatar Studios ultimately, but it's almost a weird situation where it seems shocking to say, but almost Avatar Studios have actually said more officially than Netflix have, which kind of feels weird. Like literally just that Mike and Brian podcast interview from a bunch of months ago, probably more than has come out in total about the Netflix show. So that's an interesting one. But anyway, that is all of the news that we have. So yeah, it's just kind of waiting for, will anything happen at New York Comic Con, at the panels, or coming out in or around that time? Probably expecting something Netflix at some point soon. And then Patterns in Time, of course, is releasing at the end of November, so we will have that review when the book officially comes out. Other than that, it's been somewhat slow recently. We'll see if anything happens. But we'll jump into our episode reviews now. So we're going to start off with Avatar here. We're going to do 114, The Fortuneteller. So this is a very interesting episode in that I think this has like great writing. It's super, super funny. But it is a somewhat inconsequential episode. Like, there's no Zuko B plot here. So it does end up feeling like one of the least important episodes from the book. But I think it's so well written, it goes above a lot of the other episodes that maybe have a little bit more to it, like Bato of the Water Tribe, which we'll discuss a little later on. Just because it is so solid and clear in terms of what it wants to do. In terms of like talking about, say, a Netflix show, I can see them skipping this like almost in its entirety. Maybe just a quick fortune teller reference that Katara goes in, comes out. You do that, but it's a very, very fun episode, sort of like a King of Omashu style thing of just, it's really funny with like the Sokka stuff and so on. But what are your general thoughts on the fortune teller?
Yeah, I definitely can agree that this is a fun, ultimately inconsequential sort of like episode. But I don't know, I think, it does have a bit of an emotional beat to it that I think, you can sort of understand, and you can see, with, the future in mind of the whole series, you can see where, this sort of starts and leads things together between, our main characters here. And I think even the next episode, they at least have, something of a beat behind them. Even if, in the grand scheme of things, they probably could be, connected together and or, just sort of their main key points sort of mentioned in passing almost. But they definitely are fun episodes. This one specifically has, a good bit of sort of action in it. So yeah, no, I think it's a good episode.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, getting into this, there's not too much to discuss, but one of the kind of really obvious things is that one of the main takeaways here is that it is notable Katang setup. So our kind of main ship within the show, this is where they do a lot of the kind of early work with it, in terms of like Aang is very open and obvious about his crush on Katara here on that side of things. And then this is the first time in the series we see kind of Katara right at the end of the episode, the show showing us that there is her suddenly becoming aware that Aang might in fact be that person who we were sort of talking about. And so it's finally kind of changing it from just very one-sided to, okay, Katara's not directly focused on Aang in the same way that he's focused on her, but she's at least thinking about it a little bit. And you can sort of see that the dynamic changes subtly a little bit after this. In a way that I think is pretty nicely done without making romance a massive focus of the series, which it ultimately really isn't. But it was important, I think, to do this on Katara's side of things, and I thought they did it quite well ultimately in the episode. And in general, the romance, I think, across this whole episode is actually quite good, with the Meng likes Aang likes Katara likes fortunes, and a lot of people get sort of forgotten through aloofness here. That dynamic is actually really fun over the course of the episode. But what are your thoughts on the kind of the shipping stuff here, as like basically being one of the main takeaways?
Yeah, I think it's done in a way in this one that it doesn't particularly sort of like annoy you, too much, mainly because it's really, for the most part, it's like no, I guess there's two of them, but it's like one-sided, and the other side doesn't really sort of isn't aware of it. So there is three people involved in this sort of relationship triangle here, but because they're not all fully aware of it, it doesn't sort of quite come off quite as maybe annoying as it has in other shows or other series. So I think from that aspect they do a pretty good job of it, and having it run all the way around this sort of idea of fortune and sort of fate, and where does your destiny lie, and how they eventually see that you do have some control over it yourself. I think it leads it along the lines of it being more positive than being more sort of drawn out, and that is like sort of the crux of this one, but it's not sort of a huge focus in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I suppose we should probably get straight into that, because like that's sort of like the theme of the episode. It's sort of like asking you as a viewer to be like, okay, Aunt Wu, fortunes, everyone in Makapu village takes these fortunes and treats them as they are true, they will happen. And the way the episode ultimately like decides on this is that Aunt Wu doesn't get anything wrong, but it's kind of on a technicality, but it's also the right form of being right, on a technicality type thing. So it's a weird way that they take this. We do have other instances in the franchise of fortune tellers, in that like in the Rift, of course we see Tianhaishir when it was still active. They had a bunch of fortune tellers in the court, and they'd use them to kind of predict what was going to happen, and they predicted correctly that something was going to happen there. And ultimately Aunt Wu is correct, it seems like, about basically everything, even though, as Sokka points out, a lot of them are sort of vague, open-ended, that if you follow this advice it will never not be correct. But then there are other ones where it feels like it's much more long-term, and it looks like it's going to come true, like the whole Katara one, where it's like, you will witness the birth of your third great-grandchild before passing away in your sleep. That obviously is still to come. In Korra, Katara is still alive. Great-grandchildren would be Iki, Jinora, Milo, Rohan having kids of their own. So it would, that could still actually happen, and it feels like that is something that they probably should make sure is actually true in the end. But what were your thoughts over the course of this episode, and how they did Aunt Wu and the whole, is she actually able to kind of predict correctly what people's destinies are, what will happen, and that whole idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that the episode plays it in sort of like a vague, sort of like comedic way, especially with how Sokka tries to get across that she's not really like the perfect fortune teller, or there's circumstances that happen. I think that works in his favor in terms of not making it seem too sort of like annoying, or sort of that everything sort of just is like sort of automatically happening, and her predictions are just super on point. I like the idea that there's some vagueness in there, just because at least it gives you the idea that it allows you to sort of like question her. At least, if you do want to believe in her sort of like predictions, it allows you to sort of question it. But no, I think they play it up in sort of the right way, especially with sort of the main sort of guy that sort of goes against Sokka in terms of always believing the fortune. I think, those sort of instances and, their banter between each other is fun to watch.
Yeah, and they very much play up the idea here of like the fortune. If you just compare like what is said versus like the events happening, the fortune is sort of like technically wrong. But because people like hear and see something about to go wrong and then prevent it from happening, they make the fortune true. And it's like, is part of the fortune her seeing that other people would end up making it true? Like, she predicts that the village won't be destroyed by the volcano, not that the volcano won't erupt. Like, that's sort of a kind of technicality point of like, well, yeah, the volcano erupts, but the town wasn't destroyed this year, so that's why it's correct, and so on. But then you have the other fun ones of just like, she said I'd meet the one I love when I'm wearing these shoes. And Sokka's like, so you wore them every day? Then of course it's true. So Sokka really does take a bit of a kind of beating in this episode, as he's just kind of like mocked by everyone in town, and just his heart rate really goes through the roof over the course of this one, and he just has to be sort of escorted out of the town in terms of another, like, he's gonna kill someone if he stays here. So that's all really, really fun, and I do like that. One other aspect I like is that I think the characters are quite fun. Like Aunt Wu, I think is played really, really well. Meng, despite not being in that many scenes, is really, really memorable. I think everyone remembers Meng. Of course, it's the same voice actress here as Toph. This role basically, effectively, like, got her the part of Toph later on. So that's kind of how memorable it actually was. And I like just how kind of blunt it was about how, like, Meng got a prediction that effectively someone that resembles Aang will marry her someday. So she's all over Aang. He ignores her. Katara ignores him. And it plays into the whole idea that Toph was saying the advice is, be aloof, act like you don't care, and that will get more attention put on you. And they just inadvertently end up kind of doing it to the wrong person that they ignore. It does lead to, I feel like, a really nice moment between Meng and Aang, where she just sort of like admits how she feels, but she's aware Aang doesn't feel the same way, and it ends kind of nicely, and with a nice sense of humor to it. He does tell her that, like, someday you will find someone. So it's a nice one where, like, I'd love to go back here and see what Meng is like now, and does she have a boyfriend or something like that, and just if the big ears thing, it does actually turn out to be true. I'd love to see them actually return to that. But what were your thoughts on, I suppose, Meng primarily here?
Yeah, no, I think she's definitely a fun character. I mean, I think, with everyone in the village sort of believing, so much into Aunt Wu's predictions and everything, that, it kind of makes sense that, someone from this village would sort of automatically, I guess, sort of gravitate to this being sort of like the one true thing, and maybe even more so for a younger character here. So I think, despite her being a little bit sort of odd and a little bit creepy at times, she plays the role pretty well. And I don't know, I think, the whole idea of, her being really into Aang just from first look, I don't know, I think for me it feels like it makes sense. And Aang, not really knowing her at all, wouldn't really be interested at all. But I do, like you said, it was sort of like a nice way that they sort of had, that moment, and she actually gave the book to be able to manipulate the clouds there. So I think, it sort of makes sense that it sort of would play out that well. And yeah, it would be interested to see how, how things turned out in the future if they ever did return to this village, and who she actually ended up with.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that is an interesting point here. Like, we're here in Makapu Village. In terms of other references to it, the most obvious one is that Yoon, of course, is the boy from Makapu. This is where he was ultimately sort of like found playing Paisho in the streets. There's no, I suppose, obvious connection beyond just that this happens to be the location that Yoon is sort of like related to, but it's interesting in a way, the whole like Avatar Destiny thing. He's a false avatar kind of type thing, so that works out somewhat interestingly well. And beyond that, I just say a few final points. Just like I do like that we get our kind of cloud bending scene here of like sort of highlighting kind of symbolically Aang and Katara doing bending together, working well as a team. That sort of is what like convinces the villagers to actually give them help. And then an interesting world building moment of just they ask for earthbenders. There are two twins in the village, and one's like, I'm an earthbender, I'm not, which is a very blunt way of them sort of, in a way, giving us that detail of like, just because they're twins doesn't mean they both have the same sort of like bending situation. And so it's just a fun one that actually adds a lot to the world building on how bending is passed on. That we have, I think we have twin examples of like every iteration where both of them are non-benders. One's a bender, one's not, and both are earthbenders as well. So just highlighting the random element to bending as well. And then, yeah, big Aang powerful bending moment here as he, quells the sort of overflowing lava with airbending. And this is the big moment of Katara's like opening her eyes to the fact that like, oh, the powerful bender I might marry one day might actually be Aang. I like the shot of her actually like seeing this happen. Obviously this is nowhere near as dangerous of a situation as like Roku was in that, like I said, it's more Aang quells a sudden overflow of lava, not a whole volcano. But any final thoughts from you or interesting notes from the episode that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, no, I think even if it is sort of like the overflow of the sort of volcano here, it's still no. I think when they do like sort of the pull out from the scene, you get to see a real good like sort of, I guess, sense of scale of his power. And it isn't a whole volcano, but it definitely along the lines of what they're going for in this episode, definitely shows you the power that he definitely has when he's using it in sort of the right way and with the element that he's most comfortable with. But no, I think overall it does a good job of just sort of showing them, I guess, in these last sort of moments working together, sort of coordinating between Aang and Katara, and then just sort of the whole village. Like once they get the idea that they need to do something, they're willing to do it, especially if it's anything that Aunt Wu says. But yeah, no, I think it definitely was a nice way of ending the episode.
Yeah, and yeah, like you say, Aang's move is really, really powerful. It is one of those like absolute kind of master level kind of bending techniques, fully like a charged up attack. I like that it was a bit of a kind of combo where like he kind of collects like strands of air and like breaks the sort of like part of the kind of lava kind of wave in front of him, and then basically like sucks the strands that he's using into his mouth and does this like really wide area of effect attack. Like it's almost crazy like the range that it actually has. But it was a really cool like demonstration of power, of course. So yeah, that is the Fortuneteller. So we'll move on to the other Avatar episode, and that is 115, Bato of the Water Tribe. This is one of those episodes where like watching it again, like it's a perfectly good episode of Avatar. It just ends up being surprisingly like low ranked on my list of episodes. I think part of that might just end up being that I think Bato, as like our minor character here, doesn't stand out as much as quite a lot of the other ones. Even though it is like a notable sort of Sokka character development episode, it's just the character doesn't stand out as much. There is a lot going on, like in terms of like you do have a Zuko plot. You also have other minor characters introduced, June and Nyla, a big action scene towards the end. I think this is just one of those ones where they try to do a kind of one episode dramatic plot with the whole Aang hides the information about their father from them, and it's more of a thing about like this episode and the follow-up episode are two sort of like Aang does something wrong episodes in a row. This is maybe where they should have separated them a little bit more. I think for sure there should be a gap between 15 and 16, and arguably you could just swap the place of like, put the Fortuneteller like after this and just slightly alter like this episode so you don't have that continuity moment in it or something like that, or have the deserter actually like happen like before. Just maneuvering these episodes around a little bit, I think, might work that little bit better. Otherwise, like I said, it's pretty solid. The arc that they do is nice, but it does feel very much like a one-off episode thing rather than like a full series character arc thing. And it just very much feels like a book one episode, and that they do better things with the characters in the later seasons. But what are your thoughts on Bato of the Water Tribe?
Yeah, I wonder if it's just sort of like in sort of like a hindsight that this one doesn't feel as strong as it potentially could be. Because I mean, it definitely feels like it has all the elements that would make it really good. Like we have flashbacks in here. We get to meet a character from before. We get to learn about more from the Water Tribe. So like there's good elements in here. But I do wonder, maybe it is because Bato's just like not as interesting a character as others, like you mentioned, or if it's because, you know, the end result of this episode kind of gets resolved kind of quickly, or is it because it does lead into the next episode, and the next episode is, you know, generally, you know, a lot more interesting to most people than this one. So I think, you know, maybe like you said, spreading them out would have worked better, or if they're, you know, maybe they would have added more to Sokka's character development in this actual episode if there was some way to get that in here. Because I mean, you know, they go on the whole, you know, trip with the water and everything, and they get sort of like that sort of thing out of, you know, what Sokka missed before. But I don't know, maybe it just doesn't have as much impact because it's with Bato and not his own father in this one. Maybe that's sort of it. I don't know. There could be many different things that could go, you know, maybe why this one isn't as potentially as interesting as it could be. But, you know, by its own, it's not like the worst episode, no, at all.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those ones where like I often think about this episode of like, would it really have been a problem if Bato was just Hakoda in this episode? Like they just meet their father here, like, and because that would have given more impact to their decision to like actually stay with Aang. It would have given more weight in a way to Aang actually feeling like they would leave him behind to go with their father. And then again, because Bato is a little, you know, dull as a character, and effectively does just act as a sort of fill-in father figure role to supervise the ice dodging. That's the main impact that he really has. And then when we meet him again, he's sort of just there to compare Sokka and Hakoda again, and that's really about it. Sure, he's sort of like the sort of second in command during the invasion, and that's kind of notable. But there's a little bit more to that. The other point I that might be interesting here, it would be maybe interesting if this was Gilak, who's also a friend of Hakoda's and also has the comic behind him as well. That might have been an interesting way to do it, to add more impact to the comic. But that's obviously like very much in retrospect. The comic didn't exist at this time. But what are your thoughts on some of kind of like those ideas? Like, do you think this episode would have been just improved if Bato was just someone different, more notable?
That's a good question. I mean, it would lead, you know, a little bit more, I guess, credence to what they're sort of doing here if it was someone that, you know, another leader of the Water Tribe along the lines with Hakoda, you know, that would sort of like flesh out the idea that there are other groups besides just this sort of one Water Tribe that's sort of fighting back. You know, if there was some way they could have put a character that later on, you know, we finally did get more information on. I mean, of course, that would have been, you know, more interesting overall. But yeah, I mean, I wonder, or if it was just his father. I mean, I think, you know, along the lines of what you said, that would have, you know, made it even more impactful. I guess, you know, they're trying to sort of like hold back sort of like the true family reunion there. So, you know, I could see why they wouldn't put it there. But, you know, maybe there was some other way they could have some sort of water tribe connection here, and make it more sort of like interesting overall, or make it so that it really feels like Sokka's really having sort of like an impact or a growth point in his sort of character earlier on rather than what we get later on as well.
And then just thinking about it now, I think one maybe added scene that could have really fixed things is just at the end of the episode, if they just cut to like Bato meeting up with the rest of the group, including Hakoda, and like having a conversation with Hakoda about, hey, I met Sokka, like he did the ice dodging, and you know, he's on the right path, you know, he was a really good leader, like that sort of thing, just like setting a little bit of the stage for ahead of their kind of like book 2 reunion. That could have been nice. It definitely has that sort of book 1. We don't fully want to commit to full on referencing the events of this episode. But yeah, that is Bato. The final thing is the one part with Bato I do like. I like the kind of end, like emotional point of this, and that is kind of Bato pointing out that, you know, they hear the wolves howling and like, oh, a wolf has been separated from the pack. That's how I felt when the water tribe had to leave me behind because I was injured. Sokka recognizes this and realizes that's how he felt when all the warriors left and he had to stay behind at the tribe, which Sokka then realizes is also how Aang must feel given that they've just left him behind. That whole being separated from your pack theme, it's a really nice scene because there's like 4 layers to it here, not just like 1 or 2. That works quite well, but it ends up feeling like one of the only notable real like Bato moments from the episode. But how do you like that kind of theme? That kind of is kind of how they resolve the conflict of the episode.
Yeah, I think that definitely was a good way of showing that sort of like comparison and analogy, just to sort of show that, there's different groups and, who you choose to be your family and who you choose to support and, sort of understanding, what you really need to do in certain situations. I mean, I think, it definitely is a point of, I guess, sort of, new maturity for Sokka. And him just sort of, finally sort of understanding, the idea behind the sort of flashbacks that he had earlier on. So I do like that they have that connection. And yeah, that probably is sort of like the notable sort of like emotional beat in this one. I mean, when they are doing sort of the rock dodging in the water, I mean, I think that one does have an importance there. It's kind of sort of overshadowed by the fact that Aang sort of hid things from them.
Yeah, which I suppose we'll get into that now. And obviously what happens is you get this dynamic where Katara and Sokka are meeting a water tribe person for the first time in a while. So the water tribe discussion ends up overshadowing Aang, and there's very much a sense of like he's being left out of conversations. He's used to being sort of the focus of a lot of situations, and now he's the odd one out effectively. He goes off on his own. He actually encounters the message that's the Hakoda message and intercepts it, and instead of giving it to them, he hides it, thinking that Katara and Sokka are going to leave him alone, like basically quit the journey to be with their father. And this is sort of the point of the episode at which, like, I wish they'd maybe done this a little bit better. The scene that we just referenced there, the whole, you're being separated from your pack, they get to it in the end. I feel they maybe should have hit the point a little bit harder with regards to sort of Aang being alone, like just the loss of his people. He doesn't really know anyone from this era effectively, like just the seriousness of if they were to actually leave him behind. You of course get the idea that as soon as he leaves, they of course get around to having the conversation bit where they say they won't leave him behind, but of course Aang doesn't see that. So it's to me, the problem with this is just that they lean a little bit too much into the drama here of all of this, of like Aang just barely misses the fact that they're actually being quite reasonable about this. It's a bit serious in a way what Aang does, hiding the information from them over this situation. And then when it comes out, the fact that this is apparently a serious enough situation that it threatens to completely destroy Team Avatar. Like, they're going to leave Aang on his own for the rest of the journey over this. It's just like they're making a massive deal out of this, which it's somewhat serious what Aang did. It's just I don't quite feel they gave it maybe the time and attention that it maybe needed, which is why I think The Deserter does the whole like Aang makes a mistake a little bit better than this one. This one's a little bit just focused on dramatic, and it's a little on the nose. Like when we get to the ice dodging scene, and Bato is just like, your position, Aang, is about trust, and then he earns the mark of the trusted, of course. And it's like, I get what you're doing, show. You've pointed it out a little bit too much. It just wasn't the most well executed one episode arc for Aang overall. But what were your thoughts on how they did this kind of Aang hides the information arc?
Yeah, I wonder what they could have done better, like make it more subtle or something like that. I mean, I wonder if maybe they sort of, took a little bit more time to sort of show, Katara and Sokka really how Aang actually felt in this moment, that maybe they would have sort of like understood a little bit more. Even though he did hold back the information, and that's something that they really wanted to, like, they had already decided that, they were going to stay with him. Aang doesn't know, which is, okay, and you do have to, add some drama there. But, maybe they could have spent more time for them earlier on in the episode to sort of understand, sort of, being left behind. I mean, they do have it from Sokka's perspective, when they show, his father leading. But, maybe in the current time, rather than just a sort of flashback, there could have been something there to sort of, just to sort of show the other side of things a little bit more. Because even like the people at the Abbey here, they also, feel a little bit sort of perturbed by this sort of, idea at the end, which, they probably wouldn't understand the whole thing. But Sokka and Katara, they could have potentially understood a little bit, better about it a little bit earlier on. Maybe that could have worked.
Yeah, hearing you go through it there, I really feel like in reflection that it probably was not the right decision to have Aang leave and then immediately cut to, like, Katara and Sokka are like, oh, but we weren't planning to leave anyway. I think if you had left that out and just kind of went with a little bit of an arc where they're just so excited about the prospect of meeting their dad, they almost like do forget about the journey with Aang a little bit. They're not thinking too much about that, and they're like, oh yeah, let's do that. And they just sort of don't pay full attention to the mission for a little bit. Then it's a little bit it's at least a little bit more even, whereas having that in there just always kind of undercuts and makes what Aang is doing feel, I think, way more than it actually is, even though only us as the audience have actually seen that they actually said that. And this is where they maybe could have hit home, like the whole Bato being separated from the pack bit, and made it more than just the one scene later on. That would have been kind of nice to see. That way, you might have been able to use the ice dodging scene as like a way to show that, like, Sokka needs the team to be the leader that he is, and that Aang is a part of that as well, and something like that. There was definitely a way to kind of bring that together, and then the realization is a little bit more even that, like, yes, Aang kept the information from them, but I suppose it's hard to be understanding of what Aang does, but there is a sense that they get it because of Aang's, like, sense of kind of being on his own is quite extreme because of what happened to him. That could have helped to fix it. Other than that, the Zuko side of the episode is obviously just meeting June and Nyla, so us getting to see a Shirshu for the first time. I suppose this is interesting just because it's such a notable and interesting animal. What were your thoughts on them introducing the Shirshu here to us?
Yeah, no, I think this is, I mean, sort of our hybrid animals, our unique sort of creatures of, the Avatar verse is always, cool to see. And this really, I think for a lot of people, this one sort of stands out just because of, how it interacts with the world, which is, unique on its own, and, sort of the abilities that it actually has, to sort of like neutralize people. And, the fact that the writer of the Shirshu is also one of those characters, a minor character that sort of stands out, even if you don't really see them, that much in the whole series. Like, there's really only one main time that we see them again. But, I think people always sort of like remember it just because of how, sort of unique the character is. And, eventually it does get used a bit more later on. But, I think it definitely stands out as one of those cool, Avatar animals.
Mm-hmm. In terms of other stuff from this episode, yeah, the action stuff from towards the end of the episode is quite interesting because we get like a lot going on. You get a full big animal versus big animal fight, Appa versus Nyla happening here. you get a pretty like notable like Aang versus Zuko fight. Like you can tell they put some time into the animation here with the martial arts moves, and some kind of big effects because like there's some big attacks coming in here. There's a little bit of a story to the fight as well because Aang actually tries when he fights Zuko to get the necklace back from Katara, which comes up again because this is how Zuko tracks them down. So there is some nice continuity here at the end. I like that Aang is able to sort of like make up for kind of like not giving them something by getting something back for Katara. That's nice. It kind of resolves across these two episodes the whole Katara doesn't have her necklace issue. So that's important, and I think was nice to see. Plus, you have a little bit of humor with like Iroh and June's interactions over the course of the fight. But what are your thoughts on the kind of pretty action-packed ending to this episode?
Yeah, no, it really is action packed. I don't think you probably would like suspect such a sort of action set piece in this episode that is almost seems like it's trying to go for the more sort of like emotional bit of things. But no, they definitely pull out a lot here in the last battle. Like you said, like it definitely seems like they had like specific, I guess sort of set of moves or set of ways of actually like having these two characters, Aang and Zuko, fight with each other. In terms of getting back the necklace. I mean, even seeing sort of like the battle with the animals here and how, they're used in the scene, how they use the environment, how they use, the perfume that this Abbey actually makes, and how that, sort of works and leads in perfectly with, the animal that, of course, sees by smell. So, it gives them a little bit of sort of everything in this episode in terms of like making this a decent way of sort of like capping off this episode and showing, how well, our group actually works together in the end. And, it seems like everything is, almost pretty 100% good by the end of this episode.
And yeah, it's just kind of noted that like Aang is part of their pack, Aang is part of the family. That was the whole 103 thing from Katara to calm Aang down. There's a little bit of a kind of reference to that, and so it's a nice resolution. So it is a kind of weird episode in that there are so many good elements to it, but it pretty much is sort of like universal across the fandom that this is one of the lower rated episodes in the entire series, ultimately. That, at least from what I see, it is like obviously like people rate Great Divide pretty low. Depending on shipping preferences, I think obviously people are going to rate the Fortuneteller somewhat low, Waterbending Scroll, and then this is usually always there in the kind of bottom kind of 4 or 5. Like we discussed, it seems like it is just a sense where like the fandom does typically have a good sense on what is a good character arc in an episode, and if that doesn't quite work, that is a little bit of a kind of a problem that kind of holds it back. Because otherwise, like there's a lot to praise in the episode. Like Sokka gets development with the ice dodging, which is a kind of nice sort of reference to the first episode where he basically fails at a technically an ice dodging situation that means they find Aang, quote unquote, and here he succeeds, and it's pretty notable. But yeah, what are your final thoughts on this one? It kind of a bit of a weird one, the way the kind of review goes, where we're mostly positive, but it's surprisingly low down.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's just because like in the grand scheme of like, Avatar episodes, all the other ones are just so much better than this one. So this one just sort of looks, out and is just, automatically at the bottom of the pile because of that. Or, if there's some sort of like low level or just like it's not enough of a character development in this episode to sort of, give it as credence as being like a higher tier episode overall, because there, like you said, there are a couple beats in here that are pretty cool, and I mean, we get to see some world building, we get to see some sort of understanding of the culture here, we get to see a new animal. The action set piece in this episode is actually pretty good. So I mean, I guess, if you were to consider it like just a battle, it might actually rank up a bit sort of higher in things. But, as a sum total with a character, or, with minor characters, and one is more interesting, the other one, isn't quite as interesting, it just sort of winds up being sort of at the bottom there. But it's definitely, not the worst episode at all, I think. There is something to be gleaned from it, even if, various elements could be combined or maybe even skipped and included in other episodes, if you really wanted to streamline things.
Mm-hmm. And from there, our last section of the podcast is going to be our review for our Korra episode this week, which is K110, Turning the Tides. So, yeah, we go from one of the weaker Avatar episodes to one of, in my mind, the top Korra episodes. I think I have this one for sure always in my top 10 of overall episodes of Korra. It's like we've been discussing with Korra. This is this amazing run of episodes towards the end of book one, where every episode is just really, really strong. And I think everyone remembers this episode because it's just boom, 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 like action, notable thing happening. There's kind of like the good use of like kind of like dramatic stuff always happening, and it just builds to quite a lot. And in terms of memorable fandom moments, you have so many of them here, with the ending of the episode with Lin, the ending of the episode with meeting Iroh 2 for the first time, and then, how can you go wrong when you have an action set piece happen and a character goes into labor, and you get that whole dynamic. It's just start to finish, action packed, and I've always really, really liked this episode. So, what are your thoughts overall on Turning the Tides?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does have like a lot of action. I mean, and it's the end of the season, right? So of course, things are ramping up. We're sort of seeing, sort of the culmination of like all the different sort of set pieces that have been in motion. All our characters are interacting with each other. We get to see sort of like the resolution of, or the resolution of certain sort of relationships here. We get to see just sort of, how, all of the sort of, anti-bending sort of establishment stuff is really coming to pass here. So yeah, there's definitely, just a lot of different moving pieces and a lot of, sort of resolution type elements that are starting to come into play in this episode that always stands out, I think, for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. So I want to start us off with, I suppose, what ends up being the one maybe slight criticism of this episode is that this is the sort of Asami is annoyed at Mako episode. There is a lot of, her giving Mako like the side eye, being actively kind of critical of him.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously part of that, relationship drama stuff, the shipping stuff from Korra that people don't particularly like. And this is it beginning to end. Like, they resolve it basically in the next episode, but here is the sort of setup for that, okay, it's been clear for a while now, clearly Mako, without maybe realizing himself, has sort of like made his decision just in his actions. And so Asami has seen this, and there is some complexity to the scene, because I like that this is Asami watching this happen, and she realizes she can't be super critical of it because it is just Mako like caring for one of their friends, but she's very much aware that it's maybe like a little bit too much than compared to what you would expect. But it is also a case of like Mako isn't fully aware that he's doing this exactly, and so him kind of pointing out that like, is it really the time for us to discuss this when all this crazy stuff has happened recently? It's I think meant to be sort of like the Korra version of the Katara Aang scene from Ember Island Players, where like she says she's confused, which most people didn't really have much of a problem with that. And then here's Mako kind of doing the same thing, but he gets, for the most part by the fandom, really heavily criticized for it. There's obviously a different situation here, because we had the whole Bolin told Asami that Mako and Korra kissed, and there's always the discussion to be had about how you exactly interpret that, because it was Korra who initiated it, and how does Mako really deal with that when it's brought up in this context. It's it's a weird one. I think they ultimately resolve it nicely in the next episode, but it's very notable that the rest of the episode, I think, works really well with a lot of dramatic situations, but then they always just have this cut to just a Sammy looking really annoyed, and it's like, oh yeah, there's the shipping drama forcibly kind of inserted in this episode. What are your thoughts on how they do it here? This is probably when it's the most, like, outside of 105, probably the most prevalent in an episode.
Yeah, it definitely is pretty prevalent in this one. And I mean, I guess this is just sort of like a real big sort of like build up for Asami to this point. And, we're getting to see, now that she's fully aware of this sort of dynamic that they had, she's just looking, to see how it happens. And, I do like the point that you make of, she's trying not to be, really like hypercritical of it, but, it's pretty obvious what's going on, at least to her, even if Mako isn't quite aware of it. And it's just, for this group dynamic of them and, even regardless of what's going on, it could, it's clearly causing some issues. So, she's trying to sort of like deal with it in some sort of way. And, you can see how, Mako's just not about it right here. I mean, I wonder if, Mako tried to actually talk it out or something, would it have been, received better by the fandom? I don't know. Maybe not in the end. But, this is just sort of the way that they went for it here. But yeah, I definitely can see why, at times it could be a bit sort of annoying how it, plays out. But I think in sort of the grand scheme of this episode is really not that much. Like, there's a lot of other different pieces going on, like Mako said. So I think, it doesn't really, I don't know, I feel like it doesn't get mentioned in this episode as much as it does, of course, in the other episodes where that is clearly the focus.
Yeah, like in general, yeah, in book one, I think people very much over exaggerate how much of a focus the shipping triangle actually is. It's not in that many episodes. There aren't that many scenes. This is probably the second highest amount, but in an overall pretty small amount. One of the points is just that, like, obviously they have the conversation in the kitchen. I do find it very funny that Pema just leaves the second Mako comes in, when if you trace it all back, Pema is basically the cause of all of the romance drama in the series, because she basically told Korra to do what she did in kind of 105, basically. So I like the weird look on her face as she kind of leaves the scene, realizing that, like, I don't think she exactly knows that this was her fault, but she's like, oh, I've seen this happen before, I'm out. So that was fun to note. Otherwise, there's obviously so much to discuss in this episode. I think one of the most notable things here is that we get kind of Tenzin kind of thrust into the leadership position. I like how this plays out, that all the other members of the council get taken out. Obviously, Tarlok's already been taken out previously. We find that out. And he's left in charge of the city. And the second this happens, the big attack comes in. And it's I love the framing of this, of just, in a way, this is kind of something we've been waiting for, to see Tenzin get the chance to lead the city on his own, but it's in the middle of a crisis when they're destined to lose, basically. But it's a cool sequence to see him be the only one to fend off the kind of surprise attack. What are your thoughts on Tenzin suddenly becoming the leader of the city here?
Yeah, he's the one that's last around and is in charge. And I mean, I guess, this is a situation that you never really want to be in, where, you're having to take charge of, the whole city in sort of like a crisis here. But, I think, his idea of, what can be done or what should be done, he's trying his best here, and he does, alert the Republic forces, which of course we get to see how that plays out in the next episode. He does, go to law enforcement to sort of try to get things under order. And, he does a pretty good job. Like, he's considering everything's going on, he's probably, one of the best people to sort of like deal with the situation, even if it is, just a little bit too much for him to do on his own. And he does have, other priorities that are actually going on in the real time, but he's trying to manage it all at the same time here. But, I like that you get to see, a little bit more of him in sort of this sort of role. You get to see him interact a bit more with Lynn here and sort of their dynamic and how that sort of gets, more ish resolved in this one, with everything that's been in the past with him and Penma. So no, I think there's a lot in this one that you can like for Tenzin.
Yeah, that scene earlier on, where he asked Lynn to protect the family. I like that because they basically bring up the awkwardness they used to be in the relationship, so it's maybe a bit awkward that he's asking her to protect his kind of new family. But no, it all works quite nicely, and a lot of that is kind of on like the Lynn development. Like we'll get to the dramatic stuff with Lynn later, but it's really impressive what they've done with Lynn, basically in just like 5 episodes for the most part, because it's only really in 106 where they properly start to make Lynn a little bit more likable and not just be basically angry at everyone. So they do a fantastic job in just having these scenes that, yes, you remember Lynn as having that sort of, kind of gruff attitude, but you also see these nicer moments as well from her that help to balance her out. But Tenzin going up against the odds here is really, really good to see. But like with 106, you see that the attack is just so meticulously well planned out that there's no way to defend against everything. There's just too much technology, organization, planning here. The city is just completely overtaken, and all they can basically do is just basically save a couple of notable people to prepare for like a counterattack basically at a later point. This leads to, I suppose, our big sort of like middle of the episode action set piece as like Tenzin is saved from being captured. Cool stuff here. We lose the Avocar, but it does take out a mecha tank. We get Mako doing some really cool lightning redirection. Korra, they realize more effectively how to take out the mecha tanks. Like Korra puts water in the kind of engine. Asami gets her big action set piece because here she is now using more often the shock glove herself. Bolin knocks over a couple of them. Tenzin joins the fight and kind of puts one up on the roof, which is a really nice bending move. So I like what they do here, where they have the big kind of heroic kind of flurry from everyone as they finally are able to like efficiently take out the mecha tanks. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this action set piece here as they save Tenzin?
Yeah, no, I thought that was pretty fun. I think, the way that they're able to sort of like coordinate their attacks and, now that they have the experience of fighting the mecha tanks, like you said, they're more effective in combating them. Even if unfortunately they lose, some of the forces there with Saikon and the rest of them, because they were just a little bit too late in reaching them in time for them. But, we do get to see Tenzin be saved. And like you said, Asami gets her cool moment there. So you get to see, how she really integrates pretty well into the group, just for her own abilities as a non-bender. So no, I think it's a really good, piece that they have there just to sort of show how, there is hope for them, for this battle. Like, later on we do get the main idea of how they're going to take back the whole city. But here we can see that at least together, when they're all up and running, now they're able to sort of like fight off these forces, which, even Sato sort of mentions that Tenzin is getting free from looking at the sort of chaos that's happening all over the city from above.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, those little quick moments with Hiroshi talking to Amon are quite interesting, because this is where we get to see him looking at the family picture, where we got our first look at Yasuko, which is interesting. And clearly he's thinking about this the entire time. He still cares about Asami, but is struggling with the idea that she's effectively fighting against him, and all Amon can really do is just assure him that like once we win, you'll have your daughter back, in that like basically we'll capture her and give her back to you. So it's it's one of those ones where this is probably one of the points in book one where this dynamic probably should have been established a little bit more, in terms of like, everyone's always asked the question, where, when did they meet? Because this is the two key parts of the equalist movement coming together. Where did they meet? In the next episode, we're going to find out like what Amon's deal is and how he came to be in this position, have these abilities. We know why Hiroshi hates benders, but we don't know how the two met up to form this thing. And it would be a really, really cool story to get. So it is interesting to see these moments where they talk as if they're both the co-leaders of this group, and that it doesn't necessarily really come across that like Amon is like hugely above Hiroshi or anything like that. That there is a sense of equality to this in some way, which is interesting. But what are your thoughts on seeing these interactions? Because I think it's one of the only few times we properly see the two of them interact, Hiroshi and Amon.
Yeah, no, you're right on that. And I don't know, that is something that you would be, rightfully curious about, these two people, one who's funded this whole movement and one who's, the face of it, the leader of this whole movement, interacting. It does seem like there's some backstory there that could be told that would be interesting. And, it feels like it's something that, maybe would have, something to do, would have some bearing on how they might actually deal with the situation. Like if they knew how they met, maybe there's some way that Asami earlier on could have, reconnected with her father or something like that, something that would actually, lead into, their sort of resolution that they have, 2 books later on. So yeah, no, there definitely is something that could be told there. I mean, at this point, it's something that I would highly doubt about unless there's like some sort of like retrospective, comic that they want to do on the situation. No. If they did a comic that was solely focused on Asami, that might be interesting to add that in there, just to, show the lowest point of, Hirashi Sato and everything that happened with his family. But it's definitely not something that I would expect to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, because like there's ultimately a story to be told, I think, with all the core villains about like, there's one key thing that we don't know about like every single one of them. It's how did Hiroshi and Amon meet and form the equalist movement? When did Unalaq first meet Bato? That's an interesting one. Obviously, the whole how did the Red Lotus group that we meet kind of meet each other, basically, and join the organization. That's one everyone asks for. And even Kuvira, there's probably like a origin story of her relationship with Batar, and more details surrounding her leaving with Batar that would make for a nice story. But yeah, we will move on here. So yeah, right as they kind of resolve this issue, they've dealt with everyone at the police station. Immediately they notice the island is being targeted, Air Temple Island's being targeted. So this is that sense of just the action just keeps on happening. They have like a couple of seconds of like a dialogue scene to breathe, and they immediately have to head for the island. But of course, Tenzin did leave the island defended. They have the Order of the White Lotus guards there, and they have Lin there. But of course, this is when Pema goes into labor, and Lin is put in a pretty tough situation here, where she has to kind of lead the defense of the island, but they're hugely outnumbered, and of course, it's the lieutenant leading the enemy forces. This is another fantastic scene here. Of course, I suppose one of the criticism perhaps is just that the Order of the White Lotus are just random benders in all of this. They don't come across as anything special really at all as benders for the most part. They get a kind of cool moment where they get to sort of like hold the line as everyone leaves, but they are ultimately defeated when, if they're part of the Order of White Lotus, you expect them to be a little bit better. But Lin definitely benefits from this, getting to effectively fight off an army, mostly by herself, until the Air Kids come in and we get to see them in action for the first time, which is another really, really hype moment, because you get to see that, oh yeah, even though they're all really, really young, they're all really skilled, and most people don't know how to fight against airbenders. So their skills are actually kind of perfect to fight chi blockers with, which is very, very interesting. So they save Lin, and for now they've protected the island, but more is coming. What are your thoughts on this attack on the island by the lieutenant?
Yeah, I mean the way that they set it up and everything, I think, is really cool. I mean, the fact that Lynn is sort of the last person standing, in order to sort of protect us, and she's sort of doing it just sort of like out of obligation and friendship and everything like that. It definitely adds some emotion to this, and the fact that she's saved by the air kids here, and you get to see their abilities, and like how you said, they're really well suited for going against chi blockers and everything like that, which I think at this point we've sort of even from what we've seen, how well Tenzin fights with the chi blockers, and even the mecha tanks and stuff like that is a pretty good counter. The chi blockers are fast and agile, and being an airbender, that's sort of like a default thing that you can do, so it definitely works really well. And the fact that the kids are so talented in their own regard, just leads to it working out pretty well, at least in this sort of short stand here. And yeah, I feel like whenever we talk about this episode, we're always talking about how the Order to White Lotus, just in general from Korra, seems a bit sort of watered down. And, we've talked about like maybe it's just because they're out in the open now, or just because, not every Order to White Lotus member can be as good as, the 5 people that we saw in ATLA who were Order to White members. So, I don't know. I mean, you would think that they would be, a bit sort of more interesting or have more abilities, but I don't know, maybe those ones are off doing, more important things for the Order to White Lotus, or, there's other higher ranking people, in the group, grand marshals or whatever, that maybe one day we'll actually get to see them in action, or maybe we'll, get to hear about them in a book. But no, the whole set piece here is, pretty cool, pretty intense, and it just keeps things moving and moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Order of White Lotus thing is unfortunate in that the way like I think the way logically it should make sense is that like all the Order of White Lotus members like should effectively probably be better benders than say like Mako and Bolin, but the show does lean more into the idea that actually Mako and Bolin are like super incredibly talented benders, so it's a bit of a weird one where you have these more kind of street style benders actually be better than like 90% of the secret group that everyone thinks is the best thing in the franchise. So it's always going to be a weird one. But yeah, like you said, these are just the Order of White Lotus guards. It's not like they're having, say, Korra's firebending teacher just get like absolutely like dominated here or anything like that. These are ultimately characters who don't even have names as far as we're aware. We don't know how skilled they are. They might actually be the lowest members of the Order of the White Lotus because they're on guard duty. Who knows? It's a weird one. This does lead again we're going back and forth between these big action moments, but also these nice character moments, and we get this sort of calm before the storm here as we get the really nice family moment. Tenzin arrives back to the island. Of course, Lin and the kids have fended off all the attacks. He gets to see his new son here. So we get the birth of Rohan here. Very nice, cute family moment here. But you get Korra having to, unfortunately, and she feels so sorry for it, have to kind of break up this moment because there are more airships incoming. And so it's this big sort of setup for Tenzin, as the leader in all of this, makes the decision that I have to protect my family. And I suppose it's just him realizing that basically we have lost for now. We have to hide, wait for the United Forces to arrive, and counter-strike then. It's a really fun moment, emotional moment. I do wish that maybe they had made some more importance on Rohan over the course of the entire series. I don't like that we still don't know if he's a bender or not, but we'll see what exactly happens with that. But either way, nice moment. They address a little bit of character development between Korra and Tenzin, where Korra doesn't quite want to do this, but ultimately accepts that yes, they need to be patient here. Trying to fight against this would just get everyone captured, and so she's learned patience, and that is continuing here. So that's nice. What are your thoughts on this moment here? Rohan is born.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a nice sort of like touching moment with all the craziness that's going. I mean, like you said, it definitely goes back and forth throughout this whole episode. And I think that's good. You definitely need like a little bit of a break in the action to sort of like recenter yourself. So it's a definitely good moment there. The fact that Tenzin, he has his, priorities in mind. He still has the city, at heart. But, there's other things that he has to do first, but he is going to sort of come back and, towards helping, Korra and their group sort of save the city. So, you can see that, he definitely is in the mindset of this is what, we have to do currently, and there's more to come here. So I like that, both sides can sort of realize this and understand that, things aren't, going well at all right now, but there is still some way of, salvaging things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we basically get the kind of Team Avatar escape sequence. They're all on Naga here as they leave the island. The most notable thing that happens here is that Naga sort of like slaps the lieutenant into the Shadow Realm here in another one of his moments where like, how did he not die as he falls off like the entire island? So they flee, but that basically just leads to the big sequence here. Oogie and the family are fleeing. Lin decides to make her stand, realizing that they're probably going to be caught up to if they just try and run away. So she jumps onto one of the airships, takes it out, really cool moment, damages the other one, but does pretty quickly get taken out on the second airship. But she seems to have done her job here and protected the family, but has been captured. The family know absolutely like that this is their hero here. They know the sacrifice that Lin has made. And then they double down on it by like pretty quickly cutting to Lin being brought before Amon and her getting her bending taken away, which is a hugely like powerful moment. This whole sequence is really, really strong. Like I was kind of surprised given how many times I've seen this episode, just like the emotion of that big Lin moment to head over to the airship and then deciding to, accepting her fate here, losing her bending. And they absolutely treat this as like, this is effectively the death of Lin type scene. That's the way they sort of treat here, her getting her bending taken away, is that like Amon has just got Lin in all of this. So that's a really, big moment there, kind of losing one of the heroes, one of the fan favorite characters to the villain, right at the end. So what are your thoughts on these, hugely memorable moments here right at the end of the episode?
Yeah, like you said, these are very memorable. I think everyone sort of calls back to these moments, especially with Lin, just because she is such a favorite character. Over the course of the episodes that she's been developed. So to see her, sacrifice here, it means a lot to the characters. It means a lot to us as the viewers. It really, stands out just in terms of what she had to do in this character and just including, everything with her past history. So the fact that, there is some people, some that were sort of at odds, some animosity there, but they eventually got past it. I think, that probably adds a lot to sort of the strength of that scene, even to this day, even knowing, what happens later on, of course, with everything with Lin, it's still, in this moment, you definitely can see how strong it is. And the fact that it is pretty cool how she was able to sort of take down one airship by herself and, was able to get the other one to sort of turn around here. So no, I think it's definitely, just sort of an amped up way of ending this episode with, knowing that there is still more to come.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's an interesting scene because it sort of shows like it's one of those moments where like you'll often forget like just how like dangerous kind of like bending is, and the idea that like, oh yeah, like Lin on any flying like contraption like could just take it down anytime she wants. Like, that's how powerful like a metal bender on one of these structures actually is. So it's just kind of like uh, they really highlight the idea of like, oh, bloodbenders are the most dangerous things. We have to prevent this. But like, you know, the wrong person with the wrong ability in the wrong situation with bending is like, you know, really, really devastating. And this sort of just highlights that, yeah, she basically on her own took out 2 airships. The only thing is, I suppose we have to have this discussion about that. They sort of undercut this scene a little bit later on by just sort of like off screen somehow revealing that they eventually were caught up to by like other airships and captured. Like, they never even fully say exactly what happened. It's a really weird kind of like shock reveal because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's probably one of my major criticisms with book 1 is that, like, by the time we get to the finale, it's just that, oh yeah, it happened, even though visually the 2 airships that were chasing turn back and they just get captured. What are your thoughts on that decision that they do with regards to they do ultimately have Tenzin's family get captured?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't irk me that they did get captured eventually, but the idea that they're not sort of showing the process of it, or even like, offhandedly sort of mentioning how it really came to be, that doesn't really, I don't, even to this day, that still seems kind of like questionable. I mean, it does play a role that they have to do with Cora and the group later on. So like, it works in terms of like how they're setting up things moving forward. It's just in isolation there and not really understanding it. It definitely does, undercut the moment a little bit. I mean, it's still like a character's self-sacrificing move there, so it's still pretty important, to show how much Lynn was willing to sacrifice in the moment. But it does make it sort of like a moot point with the end result of the next episode.
Yeah, because I think it would have been interesting if they just had like a moment where like they really think they get away, and then they just sort of like come over the side of a mountain. There's like Amon and Hiroshi on the flagship, and they kind of secretly caught up in that way. Just show something like that. Because I believe the way they were, it was just like the 2 of the lieutenants kind of like ships. It wasn't the one that Hiroshi or Amon were on that got. So just establishing that in the middle of all of this, they had sort of maybe predicted that, oh, they'll escape in this direction, and he sort of like he just turns up and takes out Tarlock. He also did happen to just turn up and find them. It gets across more of that idea of like, who is this guy? How does he know where exactly to be? At least it would have like shown it instead of like, but they got away. They clearly had like a massive head start. How were they found? Where were they when they were found? So there's just a lot of stuff like that going on, and it's like one of the only moments like this in all of Korra where it's just something is just full on unexplained how exactly it happened. It is very weird. But the final moment of the episode is, who is this mysterious general of the United Forces? We see it is General Iroh, who has the exact same voice as Zuko. So this is an interesting one, because obviously this is a really memorable fan reaction moment. Everyone is always like hyped because it's a character who is a descendant of Zuko, who has the name Iroh, which is emotional by itself. But then there's always the little bit of a discussion about, was it the right move to have Dante Basco just do the exact same voice for this character? I think that always does tend to come up with this, and this was the only like slight kind of point in all of this that people were going a bit like, that's interesting. I like the introduction of this character. I want to know more about him, and I'm hoping if we ever do go to the Fire Nation that they spend a little bit of time establishing more on this character. Because basically he gets sort of like the next 2 episodes, and beyond that he's in like, has a notable moment in like 1 book 2 episode, and he gets very minimal appearances after this point. But what are your thoughts on us getting to meet General Iroh here for the first time?
Yeah, no, it definitely stands out in terms of just like this moment you're meeting this character and the voice and everything like that, and it's just sort of like this like ultimate sort of like callback at this moment here. So it definitely stands out. It's definitely cool. I like how they use the character eventually later on. Yeah, it can seem a bit weird because it does have the same voice actor from before, and for a lot of the fandom, that's like such a notable thing. But no, I think for what they're trying to go with it, it doesn't bother me too much. I think they use the character well. He has an interesting role. He has some history behind him that we don't quite know, that maybe one day will get fully explored, but maybe not. So I for the last little bit of the end here, and the fact that you get to see all the ships that are coming to hopefully help save Republic City, definitely is a iconic moment there.
Hmm. And yeah, like this is this thing, like other than like the references more or less in this episode, I don't think they were referenced in any other episode. Like this is us seeing the United Forces for the first time. This is the military of Republic City, the United Republic of Nations, and it's like this is what the four nations basically working together have produced to be their kind of military. How good are they? And it's obviously an impressive force. We're strapped for time in this book, the smallest number of episodes, so they have to pretty quickly defeat them, of course, as we'll discuss in the next episode. But it's still interesting overall what they do here, and I do like it, and the whole Boomy connection to this as well is interesting. But yeah, that is K110 Turning the Tides, and is more or less the end of the podcast. Next time out on the next podcast, we're going to be reviewing another 3 episodes. So we're going to be reviewing from Avatar 116, The Deserter, 117, The Northern Air Temple, and then from Korra K111, Skeletons in the Closet. So this is an interesting grouping of episodes because The Deserter is a very well liked episode. It's got Zhang Zhang in it. Everyone loves The Order of the White Lotus. Here's one of those guys. Zhao kind of comes back into things. I'm very interested to go back to the Northern Air Temple because it's an episode where I so many times often don't really know how to consider it because it's a weird one where like not the most memorable characters in terms of the new ones they introduce, but they do come back to it. There's a surprisingly big action set piece in this one. Sort of plays with kind of Air Nomad history stuff, but not quite. So it's a bit of a weird one that I'm excited to discuss again. And then I love Skeletons in the Closet. Love the backstory. Another amazing book 1 episode. So I'm pretty excited for the group next time out. But what are your thoughts on the next group of episodes?
Yeah, I think all of these are pretty good. I think, they all have some interesting bits in them that add towards, really well towards the story and the world building at that point, even if they are sort of like, sometimes some of them, might be a bit sort of confusing in terms of how you think of them in sort of the grand scheme of things. But no, I like all these episodes, even, 117, even if it does seem like a odd one, the fact that we're just getting to another air temple, even if it's completely different than how, we imagine it or Aang might imagine it, there's a lot to be sort of gleaned from that one. But no, I think these are a good set of episodes.
Yeah, Northern Air Temple is like kind of surprisingly maybe the Air Temple we kind of have the most history with because so much kind of happens with around to it. So that's all interesting. But yeah, that's going to be on the next podcast, and then after that, of course, I think will be our first just 2 episode one in a while where we do the Core Book 1 finale. And obviously we're getting into basically also the finale of Avatar Book 1 as well. So interesting stuff. But yeah, otherwise that has been the podcast episode 252. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.